The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain. Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms, and again, Nephi Cole here. Well, I'm here with Nephi Cole because I'm at his house.
It's becoming the de facto location.
It's starting to be.
Well, I'm sorry about that.
And also
Except
a
I'm not.
de facto factoid. No Mike McGrady again this week.
That's okay.
But we're going to remedy that.
He's coming.
We're remedying that. Yep. So stay tuned. We're going to remedy that.
Good things take time.
That's
Mike will
right.
be here again.
He will be here again. So I'm going to jump right in today. In our last episode, we talked about wanting to get all the right information out there and doing our best to get both sides of an issue. We were talking about President Biden's executive orders, and particularly we were talking about the oil and gas leasing pause.
Uh-huh.
And I have, I put it this way, because that leasing executive order happened and we recorded a podcast within hours of that dropping.
Yes.
That I'll take some blame here. I missed a couple of things.
Okay.
So I wasn't 100% on a couple of things.
So this is a correction. Go
ahead.
ahead.
I'm going to give a correction because, like we said at that episode, we want to make sure we get the right information out there. So I'm going to correct just a couple of things. So I'm going to call these Wilms's mistakes from the prior episode. We're just going to lead with Wilms's mistakes here.
Oh, I like that. I will do this every time from now on.
Right. And maybe you had mistakes too, but these are my mistakes, so I'm going to own them.
Go ahead.
All right. So mistake number one. I mentioned I think I said there was a lawsuit. There had been a coal lease moratorium during the Obama administration, a pause on leasing federal lands for coal. Right.
Yep.
And I believe I said I couldn't reference the case. I was thinking in my head there was a case. I couldn't reference it, but I thought here was what the case said. And there was no case. There's a reason I couldn't recollect the case. I went back, I checked. There's no lawsuit filed over the coal lease moratorium.
So it made it hard to reference.
So it really made it hard for me to recollect, and I shouldn't have tried to speculate. So there was no lawsuit. So everything I said about the coal lease moratorium lawsuit, just scratch that.
Okay, done.
So mistake number one. This isn't really a mistake. The second one isn't really a mistake. It's a clarifier, just to clarify exactly how this executive order worked. So we talked about this in the context of this executive order basically saying, there's going to be a pause on leasing on federal lands, that's the result of the executive order. But we forgot to mention that there's one additional step that has to occur. As with almost all of these executive orders, it's directing the federal agencies to do something. And so it's really a direction to the Secretary of Interior to issue a secretarial order to stop leasing on federal lands, right? That's a super hyper-technical nuance. The result is the same. Everything we talked about is the same, but I want to make sure I am clear on that hyper-technical nuance, because it brings me to a third piece that we didn't talk about, but has happened since we recorded. There has been at least one lawsuit already filed over this secretarial order. Only it raises a legal question for me as I'm looking at it, because it's challenging a presidential action rather than a final agency action. Like the question is has anything actually happened yet to trigger a lawsuit?
Who brought the lawsuit?
I believe it was Western Energy Alliance, but then again, here's one of those things where I might have just jumped out ahead of myself without absolutely confirming it.
We'll just roll with we don't know for sure, but
it was an energy industry association of some sort that filed this lawsuit. But it was challenging this presidential action that really hasn't officially done anything.
William Perry Pendley wasn't the attorney, was he?
I'm just kidding. I'm not going to speculate on that.
No, but it would be awesome. It would make everything come full circle, and we'd know where he was.
So that's a piece of news. The legal side is that there is a lawsuit that has been filed, but I'm sitting here as a lawyer looking at it and questioning whether there's any standing for this particular lawsuit at this point. Is there a final agency action to sue upon? What is the harm? There hasn't even been a lease sale yet. There hasn't been a lease sale that's been prevented from happening yet. So what is the harm? Like the elements of standing that you have to meet to actually bring a lawsuit, I'm not convinced are met yet. Do I think that people
can
explain
meet that really quick for all the non-attorneys who are listening? So what are the things that have to happen? So explain that really, if you can, and just in a nutshell, the process that, in order to have it happen.
I mean, I'm not going to say everything. There's a lot of different factors, right? But basically, you have to be a party that's impacted by a decision, and you have to show that there is actual harm caused by that decision. And
you also have to show a decision's been made.
And the first step is showing that there is a final agency action. There's a decision that has been made.
You can't sue because you think somebody might do something.
Exactly.
You have to sue on what they do.
On that's actually happened. And then you have to show that you are going to be injured by that action. You have been or are eminently going to be injured by that action.
It can't be speculative.
Right. Exactly. And so that's where I'm sitting from. I'm looking at thinking the lawsuit might be just a little premature. I'm not saying that there isn't a lawsuit there to be filed. And believe me, there will be multiple lawsuits filed once there's a final agency action. I think there will be people companies, states, others that will be able to show harm. A state certainly will be able to allege some kind of a harm, because if a lease sale doesn't go through and they get 48 cents of every dollar, that's 48 cents of every
The Attorney
acre.
General of Wyoming ought to be on it right now, just preparing, saying like, this is going to hurt us. So,
right.
In fact, this is kind of a side note, working for, if somebody worked for a governor before like we did. So let's just say it like we did this before, which is that, when we saw something like this coming during the Obama administration, what did we do? We would be making a record of just, a year ago, we would start being, for example, Waters of the U.S. We would be getting telegraphs from the administration on what they might do, and we would be sending repeated communications up to multiple levels of that agency saying, like, we have concerns, this doesn't look good. What about this? And like just basically putting it out there, giving them an opportunity to change their direction, but also creating a record, because if it does go to some kind of a lawsuit, we knew we were going to need to have a record of our communications so that we could explain how, so we'd have standing.
Right. And in the context you're talking about, sometimes in a rulemaking process, a formal rulemaking process, one of the elements to have standing is you had to actually engage in the rulemaking process.
Yeah, you couldn't just show up.
If you didn't participate and provide public comment and let your concerns be known so there was an opportunity to potentially address them during that process, then then you wouldn't be able to sue at the end. You have to show you did that. This is a little bit different, but what I agree with you on, one thing we do know is the president's been campaigning on this for a while. So the state and all the states in the West that have public lands this isn't a surprise that this happened.
They should have been anticipating this,
which means they have likely been preparing for this. And that industry's been preparing for this. And they've been preparing because the day it came out, there were a whole bunch of ads airing on major networks across the country saying how this was going to be a huge job killer. They didn't have advertising firms on standby to put together a 30-second spot and enter into contracts to sell that ad space for that spot, in hours. Right? They planned for it. They knew it was coming. They've been planning for it. So the impending litigation it's been planned for. Like, people are planning for this. Yeah. So it'll come as no surprise to the administration that there are going to be states and industry groups and others that challenge this executive
and
order.
It's going to be interesting to see where they challenge it at, who challenges. It's going to be...
Yeah, so stay tuned on that. So that's the clarifying piece. Okay, so here's the third one.
Okay.
The third one is I said that the Mineral Leasing Act requires quarterly sales. I'm half right. Right? The Mineral Leasing Act is not what requires quarterly sales, but the implementing regulations, the regulations that have been adopted by the agency pursuant to the Mineral Leasing Act.
So it's
those
not
regulations,
in the statute itself, it's in the implementing
it's
regulation.
in the implementing regulations that require quarterly sales, quarterly lease sales. And so, and the authority to write those regulations is granted by the Mineral Leasing Act. So those two things are wedded, and the regulations have the force and effect of law, all that sort of thing. I would imagine that's one of the pieces that the administration is going to look at during this pause, as they're calling it. They're probably going to take a look at how often they have to do this, and they can address that through regulation. And then there'll be an opportunity for public comment and litigation on the back end of regulatory changes too. So this is going to be a long, drawn-out battle over how leasing occurs on federal lands.
Well, Dave, thank you for the update. It was super wonky.
It is super wonky, and I'm going to give one last wonky update, and this is for the benefit of maybe not the benefit, but for the thanks of one of our listeners who happens to work in the industry and for an agency with working with the oil and gas community and has a pretty deep understanding of all of this. And he's been a follower and a listener for a long time, and we frequently get communications, and he followed up after this last episode, and when we were talking about how much, because I think I dived.
He's not going to take away my car, is he? Because he's mad. He's not going to be like, no more gasoline for you.
I didn't get the impression that he was mad.
I'm just checking.
He was
I really, really like gasoline.
He was offering some additional data points for us to put out here, and I think that could be helpful, because what we did do is we said on the low end, here's what oil and gas leases are selling for right now, the $1.50 an acre.
I am pro-environment, but I am also very pro-gasoline in my tank.
Driving your truck?
Yes.
Yeah. So we had given information about the price per acre on the very low end, that $1.50 an acre, and what that meant. And he provided some information about it, in at least certain places, and I'm not going to give away where he is or what state we're talking about or anything like that. But there are places on federal land, for example, where the prospect for development is pretty high. He wanted it to be known that that acreage will lease for between, on average, $6,000 to $10,000 an acre, which means each acre can bring back $5,000 to the state, roughly.
That's significant.
And I think that's a
significant
fair
difference.
point to raise, that we talked a lot about the low end, and that was a point I was making, was that we're leasing a ton of acreage for pennies on the dollar, and that maybe states aren't getting good bang for the buck. And frankly, if you didn't lease those acres, you're not really costing the state that much money. On the flip side, we're also leasing acres that are really high development potential and that are bringing in legitimate revenue to the state when you talk about some of these acres.
Tens of thousands of acres at
right, and
$3,000 an acre. That gets to be that's real money.
And when we talk about states like Colorado and Wyoming and New Mexico bringing in, in some years $50 to $70 million in lease sales, that's driven not by those low dollar ones for sure. The $1.50 an acre, that contributes virtually nothing to that. But at the $6,000 to $10,000 an acre and sometimes higher, that's a very real revenue stream.
And that's just the leasing. That's not even counting the product that comes out, which you also get profit on. So, and that's a point. And we mentioned there was a discrepancy between, but we didn't say what it was, a discrepancy between what you'd get on state and private lands for royalty payments versus federal lands. And that might be something that's looked at in this process. Federal lands, it's like 12.5%. Right, for royalty on private lands. And I experienced this when I was in private practice, because I negotiated quite a few of these deals for landowners on private lands. The private mineral. If they own private mineral.
If the landowner owns the mineral rights in a good production area, and frankly, I would make this argument even if it's not in a high production area. Landowners, if you're listening to this, do not settle for less than 18 to 20% royalty. I get calls from landowners that said, "Hey, I was offered 8% or 9% from a company wanting to drill. What should I do?" And they were just getting lowballed. And then the second they retained counsel, and I'd come in, doubled. Then all of a sudden it was 18. You get to 18% in a hurry. So 18 to 20% is kind of the going rate on private lands. State lands can be anywhere from 12 to 26% depending, but kind of fall in that 16% range. And then he did
And we're
want
talking for a private landowner. Let's just
I'm rushing through this fast.
I know.
Sorry.
I don't know if it's safe to say this, but we're literally talking about potentially millions of dollars in revenue.
Well, I do want to be really careful here, because this executive order only affects leasing of federal lands.
Yes.
It doesn't affect royalties on federal lands. It doesn't affect existing permits. It doesn't affect existing leases. It doesn't affect state lands. It doesn't affect private lands.
It only affects the ability of those federal acres to be able to be utilized.
Well, to be clear, it only prevents additional lease sales from the federal estate. That's it. Period.
So we're talking about future actions, and we talked about that on the last one.
Yeah, we did. We're not going to go through that. I just want to make sure.
And I was just trying to help people understand, because this is going to come in other discussions that we have someday, and everybody listens to every one of our podcasts, I know, so we're not going to have to repeat this because you already learned it on this podcast. That's one of the challenges when you talk about dealing with private lands or, private mineral or federal mineral on private lands and some of these things that affect people's livelihoods. If somebody were to say tomorrow, we just don't want to have oil and gas production. We hate it. Go away, oil and gas production. When you're looking at a private landowner's pockets, that can be worth that mineral can be worth an extremely large amount of money to those ranchers who are out there working. It can be life. It is life changing.
Yeah. When
they have these things, it changes from somebody who's barely squeaking out a living on a ranch to somebody who, you're watching Yellowstone and you're wondering, how does that all, how do these ranchers, make ends meet? They make ends meet a lot of times by being able to utilize these mineral rights.
Well, and so where does, not to belabor this will be the last point I make, because I'm done with all of my corrections, right? But last point I'd make on this, and we can maybe talk about this more in a future podcast, but in the West here, where you have a big federal estate and you have private landowners intermixed, those private landowners may have mineral rights. They may own the mineral rights, and they may want to develop those mineral rights, but frequently the acreage is too small, and the amount of mineral rights they have are too small for an energy company to want to come in and only develop their lands. They would only want to do it if they can what's called pool it. So they would pool that with federal mineral rights that they get through a leasing process. So there is, if we want to talk about a negative consequence to landowners from this, the longer a pause goes on, or whatever the impact is on leasing, if federal lands are not leased over a long period of time, it does impact in many places in the West. Maybe not the Front Range of Colorado, but West, where you have more of that heavy federal estate intermixed with private lands, it will affect that landowner's ability to market their mineral rights.
So here's a question for you, and I don't know the answer to it, which is why I'm asking. But with directional drilling technology, we talked about trespass a couple of episodes ago. Does those lines that we talk about going up to the heavens, do they go straight down as well in terms of directional drilling?
For sure.
So basically, if you're buying a lease, even if you have X amount of private land, as soon as you hit that border, if they don't have the rights to everything around it, like the drill hole stops there. And again, because
you can't take the federal minerals.
Yep. And so for people that don't know, because some of our listeners are not going to know this,
right.
Modern drilling technology, you're not drilling holes straight down anymore. And this is why fracking, one of the reasons it's so important. You're drilling a hole.
Unless you're Tiger Mike.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of Tiger Mike?
No, but I don't want to.
So 10,000. Tiger Mike, that's an episode all in and of itself. Google Tiger Mike.
Yes.
But you'll have everything you want to know later. Yeah.
So
sorry.
Instead of, drilling straight down 10,000 feet, what they're doing is they're going down 10,000 feet, and then they literally, by putting torque, it's just awesome to think about this. They're putting torque on the bit that's down there, and they're making that thing now go horizontal. And so they'll have these, 8-mile long horizontal run. And then when they frack, and this is well below, we're talking about, 8,000 feet below any usable water source.
You're just making up numbers now. No. But I know several thousand feet at least, yeah.
Depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
But then they then what they will do is they'll frack, which is fracturing the rocks around that hole so that more gas will come in.
Just to release the gas and oil. Yeah.
And so that's why you don't have to have a drill rig every, half a mile or whatever it's been in the, historically it's that number I made up. They're very limited in the surface that you actually impact.
And why you can run 12 laterals off of one well pad.
Right. Yep. Cause you'll just basically bring it up and then cut a new hole out there.
Yep.
So anyway, very interesting.
All right. So that covers my list of the Wilms mistakes from the prior episode.
This is why you should listen to the Your Mountain podcast.
I'm owning it.
Yeah. Well, that's good. You know how many people are doing a podcast like this right now and telling and correcting themselves on that stuff?
Zero
people except Dave Wilms on the Your Mountain podcast.
Facts matter. I want to make sure I'm right. So I'm willing to correct it. If you send me an email saying I'm wrong and I can confirm that I'm wrong, I'll correct myself on
how many
podcast.
People are out there doing a podcast like this that you think actually know what they're talking about? Not people that talk. Because it's really interesting because we started this podcast, for people that don't know, we all worked together as senior policy advisors for the governor of Mead, for Governor Mead in Wyoming. And you, me, and Dave.
I'm Dave. You meant Mike, who's not here. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There you go.
Your other you. But we all had areas in the natural resource world that we were responsible for, and all as part of his senior team of like the very, how many of us were there?
I'd have to go back and recount. It was not a lot.
Yeah. So literally meeting with him at, daily basis, and then we had a conference table in the governor's office, like the senior team, we'd get together and we'd powwow at the conference table and then break off to go work on our own areas. And so, literally every day, this is all that we did and then managed for you. How many, I had multiple agencies that I was their touch point for. Those agency directors would come to me and then,
yep, same here.
I know that's frightening to people, and I apologize for that.
Terrifies me. Yeah.
But I will tell you that sometimes we joke around more on this podcast than we ever did when we were in that.
We were very serious in those positions.
So
this is our outlet.
Yes. Good. So we were not as confrontational with anyone, especially agency directors and staff, as we are with each other. But we did challenge each other behind the scenes. Absolutely. And then makes you better. And then we'd find the right way to challenge agency directors. If somebody came and brought an idea to us and said, like, we think this is the right way to go, we would demand, we'd be like, okay, I want to know the alternative argument. And then we're going to walk through these arguments so that you and I, when the agency director goes away and we talk to agency director number 2, because sometimes we had agencies, we'd have Oil and Gas Commission on one side, and then we'd have DEQ on the other side. And so we're going to be making decisions, the environmental protection guys versus the development guys, state lands who's trying to maximize their revenue versus game and fish who might have a different perspective on what they want to do with those lands. So we're managing all that, listening to that, and then we would take recommendations. We would take all the paperwork up to the boss and sit down and make recommendations and then make the arguments. And then the governor, then listening to their policy advisors, he makes the final call on what's going to happen. So
and when he made that call, that was the call.
Yes.
Like you just, okay, yep. He's made it because he has a million decisions to make.
Yep.
And he doesn't want to have to revisit them all the time.
And this comes up in other areas. And when the boss makes a call, you ride for the brand.
That's right.
When he makes that call, that's your call. And every agency, you better jump in line. There's no behind the scenes. You didn't then, go out to a newspaper and say, well, the governor said this, but I really think that's not what no, it's the right decision, and you get behind it and you run it.
That's right.
You ride for the brand. So anyway, that's what we did. Well, while we were doing that, we have a really good friend, a guy named Steve Ranella, who was on our first podcast.
Some of you might have heard of him.
Yeah.
He has this podcast.
If you don't listen to his podcast because you're spending too much time listening to ours, that's okay. I was going to say, there's probably a bunch of you that might listen to his podcast if you have time after you finish listening to ours. And but
that's
if you
great.
only have time to listen to ours, great. If you have time to listen to 2, you might as well listen to Steve's because it's very entertaining.
Yeah.
I listen to it.
You tell me when to listen to it?
Yeah, I tell you when to listen to it. And I was listening to it the other day, which we'll get to in a second.
And you told me I needed to listen to this one.
Yeah, so we were listening to, we listened to it.
Yeah, it's true.
And Steve would, to be honest, don't get mad, Steve would call us. or his staff would call us. They'd ask questions, and we'd, because we bounce texts off each other, and we sat there and said, you know what we should do? There aren't podcasts out there that really get in the weeds on this policy stuff. And so we thought a great idea of we would start this podcast and do that. We had to get permission from the chief of staff because this could not be Governor Mead's.
Terrified.
I wasn't smart enough to be scared.
I was scared that not of her. Well, I'm kind of scared of her, but I was scared that we had this great idea and we were going to walk into her office and say, you know what we want to do? We want to have this deep policy conversation podcast that deals potentially with some of the issues you're weighing in on. We're not going to tell you what we do for a day job.
And we didn't tell anybody for a long time.
Right, never did. We're not going to do that. But
just like we don't tell you what we do now.
Yeah, but I think at some point maybe we should, because I think there could be a lot of value. I've been thinking about that. There could be a lot of value for people knowing what we do, but we're not going to, I guess. We can talk about the industries we work in.
I know what you do.
I know what you do.
Well, maybe someday I'll tell somebody what you do. I'm not going to state myself.
So we did. We sat down with the chief of staff, who is now a state Supreme Court justice.
Yes, Supreme Court Justice Gray.
Yeah, and got her blessing, which kind of surprised me.
It surprised me too, and it cost me a lot of work because Mike and we really didn't care. You were wedded to this. You want to do this so bad.
I wanted this.
I know that Mike and I were like, well, you should probably say no or not even have to worry about it, but you wanted to do this so bad.
Sure, we'll do it with you. You get Carrie to say yes, we'll do it.
Yeah, which is funny because you don't even know how the recording equipment works. But hey, we figured it out so we could do anyway. But it's anyway, that's when we started.
Yep.
And at the time that we started, there were only 2 podcasts. There was ours and Stephen Rennell's. We're the only podcast in the entire world.
And now there's 850,000.
Now there's 850,000 you have to listen to. And there literally are, there weren't 2 at the time, but there literally are 850,000 podcasts now.
Yeah. Of all topics and all things.
Yes.
Anything you want to listen to, you can go find.
It is literally like the Facebook of...
audio Facebook.
It's audio Facebook of what would you call a podcast is somewhat like it's like going to a class. It's like you decide to go to a professional development seminar. The only problem with this now is this. There's 850,000 of them, and most of the people putting on those professional development seminars have never worked in the area that they're trying to develop you in. They're they haven't got a clue. They are, and this is,
But that's why we did this.
That's why we did this.
Is because
some are better than others.
Yep. We've been working on this stuff for a long time, individually and collectively, working on these issues you as a scientist first, Mike and I as attorneys first, then into the policy world. So we kind of bring this science, law, policy, and having worked in it on a day-to-day basis to the table, which we're not media people. So that's why we tend to, these aren't succinct. We're not good at editing things down, but we do
We're not going to edit anything ever. Why? Because we don't know how this machine works. I don't know how this works. So, but yeah, some podcasts, this is a cautionary tale. If you go listen to the wrong podcast, if you go listen to information, you're standing around the water cooler telling somebody what facts are, you're going to get it wrong. So make sure when you're looking, just because it literally is exactly like Facebook, where Facebook, you can kind of get the information you want based on literally who you pick as friends and what you say to on Facebook, you're going to get the truth that you want.
It's a fact. It's going to focus it for you.
It's frightening.
It's going to silo you up.
It is frightening. Yeah. Literally, it's going to give you, you're like, oh, that seems about right. And then the next few things that you're going to get are going to be, they're going to steer you. Just like a rudder for a ship. It's going to start to steer you down the pathway of that is truth. And you are going, but the problem is this river is much larger than one boat, than just one boat. And so you're not going to get everything, especially if you do not recognize that there are 850,000 idiots out there doing podcasts, and a bunch of them are getting their information from Facebook.
Yeah.
They're going to
I'm not going to say they're all idiots.
No. There's some
really great stuff out there. There's some really good podcasts.
I think that MeatEater does a fantastic job, and I'll say this. they're not industry experts typically in, if they're going to ask about wildlife law. Those guys, that's not what they do. But they're going to ask people who know. Mm-hmm. How do I know?
How do you know that?
Because there's last episode that they did. I had some notes here. I was like, I gotta tell Dave about this. They were talking about, bag
limits.
Bag limits.
Yeah.
Possession, how many animals you could have in possession versus how many you could shoot. And then, it was honestly kind of confusing, some of it. And I think some of it, they went into the weeds in areas that they didn't need to go into because it's not applicable. It doesn't matter.
It was speculation that was never going to
happen
out in reality.
We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the funny part to me was, I think Steve kind of got him back on track with the discussion about he talked to a friend, a warden in Alaska, which we'll get to that. But then he said, I've got this friend who used to work for the governor of Wyoming. And I knew immediately, cause I know that,
well, he didn't say governor.
Well, but it was you.
He said, I have this friend that was the head attorney for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department.
Yeah. So next time.
And that was me.
Just attribute us.
So
just give attribution to the Your Mountain podcast. And that goes for you too, Sam. And it's just, because why? We'd like to have more than 10 listeners.
We got way more than 10 listeners. We got a lot of listeners. We're actually doing well. We don't have MeatEater level listeners. But we're doing pretty well.
That's because you're not entertaining.
I know, neither are you.
If
we had Mike here, that'd be different.
But we. But
anyway,
we do know something about bag limits, and so I thought it was interesting. They were talking about this, and I thought, let's clarify this a little bit. So, but I think it's deeper than that. So, Ryan Callahan, who's a great guy, talked about a discussion with the warden, and they were, speculatively talking about if you fished here, or if you hunted there or whatever, how much stuff could you have in your possession? How much stuff could you have in your freezer before the game and fish guy shows up? And, if he shows up at your house, is he going to come in there with, DNA sampling and, lock you up for having too many kinds of goose jerky? Because he's going to weigh your goose jerky and figure out that you had to have killed 50 geese to have that much jerky. Is that ever going to happen?
Not that I can think of.
Why?
Well, first of all, the agency's got limited resources, and you mix a bunch of meat together and turn it into jerky. Even if they wanted to tack on a crime of, over bag limit, they don't have the resources to do that kind of an analysis, first of all. So let's even take that piece out of it. So now let's talk about, let's just say, okay, you go out and you have a bunch of geese in your freezer, and maybe you have a few geese from last season in your freezer, and you've gone out and you've got some geese this year. And if you were to count that up and your possession limit were 12 and you had 14 in your freezer, are you violating the law? Right? Now, remember, everything we're talking about here, this is not legal advice. Don't go out and do anything we're saying here. This is just providing a perspective, right? I don't know if I know any wardens that are going to go seek a warrant to go search, from a judge, get a signed warrant from a judge to go search your freezer to find those 2 extra geese that you have from the prior season that put you over the possession limit.
And are they live when you've got them in the freezer?
Of course not.
No, I'm just joking that. But here's one of the other things. I think Steve did a good job of explaining this and talking about it, kind of I heard. But let's talk about what it really is. Is most wardens, once that's turned into there's a difference between having, two whole elk in a freezer, with their horns and everything on them, and having elk steaks in the freezer.
So let's split that up. Think about the policy reason behind having a possession limit and why it would apply, especially for birds and fish, right? You have daily limits and possession limits because from a management perspective, you're getting surveys, you're finding out how much people are out hunting, how many days in the field they have, and you need to manage for sustaining populations or growing populations, or you need to manage for fewer animals, depending on all sorts of circumstances. But it's a management tool to maintain a healthy wildlife populations. And so how do you apply that tool? Well, the the way that it's really applied from a policy standpoint is if you want to go to South Dakota for a week-long pheasant hunt, right? And South Dakota is going to have daily limits and possession limits on pheasant. You go to South Dakota for a pheasant hunt. The idea is you hunt for a day, you take those 3 into your possession. You want to be able to hunt a few more days. And you might be staying in a hotel or a cabin or a tent, and you're going to have more than just what you got that day. You're going to have maybe 2 or 3 days worth of animals that you killed in a cooler or bagged, whatever. That's the idea. Really, really, at a fundamental level, the thing you're looking at is the possession limit being, possessing on that trip. Now, I don't want to say it's exclusive to that, right? That's kind of what you're getting at. But if you, for example, if you poach a deer, you poach a deer, and the warden...
I'm not going to poach a deer.
I know.
If you poach a deer.
The hypothetical you. You. If an individual poaches a deer...
Okay.
And they take that deer into their possession, and they put it in their freezer, process it and put it in their freezer. And Game and Fish gets wind of this, and they go do an investigation, and they get a warrant to come into your house and search. And they're looking for the weapon, the firearm you used to take that deer. They're looking for any evidence that you killed that deer. Maybe it's, what kind of ammunition do you have that might match the ballistics of the animal that was killed, that was left in the field, or whatever. And then they open a warrant. Then they open your freezer, and they want to confiscate the meat, and they see that you have an overage on fish or some other animal, you're over possession limit. You will get written up for that. Yeah. Now, it'll get tacked onto that.
Exactly. And remember, they did not show up at your house looking for an overage of fish.
No. I can't think of an example where that's likely the first.
Yeah. Even if the game warden is your friend, which happens to some of us, and he comes over and looks in your freezer, he's not looking in your freezer wondering where that meat came from. We're talking about there's something significant that they're there for. That's why they have the warrant.
Now, they might have been tipped off. Maybe somebody's out fishing, and somebody calls in and says, I swear this guy just took 50 perch, and there was a 10 perch limit. Mm-hmm. Right? They took 50 perch today. You should have seen all the perch they kept. They absolutely must have an overage. Well, at that point, not only would you be probably over the daily, but you'd be over the possession. And they might come to your house, and it might be strictly for a possession limit violation. But absent somebody seeing this happen and turning you in, it's pretty unlikely that a warden's going to knock on your door wanting to look in your freezer.
It rarely happens unless your name is Dave Wilms and you poached a bunch of elk and had them in the back of your pickup truck, in the parking garage, at the governor's mansion, and then
allegedly.
Right?
I think I've told that story anyway.
I think you did. It's a great story, though.
It
wasn't. It was just
perfectly legal. Just somebody that wasn't a hunter that was confused by seeing a bunch of
and it was a hazing opportunity for a new game warden to send him to Dave's house.
It was so funny.
Anyway.
And I wasn't even there. My wife answers the door, and then she got in on the game, and it was just
good times.
It was funny.
That's what happens when you. Okay,
but they were legally harvested elk by myself and by Mike,
and the blood washed off the concrete in the parking garage fairly well.
That's what I understand. It was quite the blood trail that of the blood trail that was left in the parking garage.
Yep. The governor thought it was funny.
Yeah, I know I've told this story, but now I'm feeling I almost have to tell it again. So we'll tell it another again. Yeah,
go find it. It's on one of our episodes.
I know I've told that story.
So, okay. I also wanted to talk about this concept of so people understand how this works. Ryan had talked to a game warden, and because game wardens know everything and they make all those policies, the game warden explained how the policy is because the game warden makes the policy. Is that right, Dave?
Not precisely.
Not exactly. Right. Let's explain why it's not right. And I think this is important to understand. We have these game laws that guide our decisions, and they're an expression of the will. The idea is they're an expression of the will of the people. Why?
Exactly.
Because where do they come from?
Yeah, the legislature.
The legislature?
Or the legislature passes something that gives authority to the Game and Fish Commission to pass regulations.
And the Game and Fish Commission is acting on behalf of the chief executive of the state.
Right.
Who is also the chief law enforcement officer of the state.
Right.
So that's
the governor.
The governor. And so basically that's where your law is coming from.
And the will of the people, the hunting community. Like they're taking a lot of feedback from the hunting community and saying
they're telling the legislature which laws to pass.
Right.
Or they're telling the Game and Fish Commission
Yeah.
what they think the rule and regulation should look like.
How we should police ourselves.
So then that comes out as that becomes the law. Does every warden, in your understanding, because let's be honest, you were the attorney in charge of the Wyoming Game and Fish Agency.
Well, I was the attorney representing the Wyoming Game and Fish Agency.
Did you, in your estimation, and I know I'm not picking on wardens, I'm picking on like everybody. Do all of us understand all the laws the same?
Not at all.
Do game wardens necessarily interpret all the laws the same?
No.
No. In fact, if you had something like this and there was a question, what would Game and Fish do to make sure that we didn't have, trespass laws being interpreted differently in the east and west side of the states?
Yeah. So, and every state agency might be a little bit different, right? Mm-hmm. But the goal of the agency, of the chief game warden, of the director of the Game and Fish Department, of the Game and Fish Commission, of the whole leadership team running the agency, they want to see the laws and the regulations, the statutes and regulations applied fairly and consistently around the state, with appropriate discretion built in for unique circumstances for a warden. So they're going to put together some protocols. They're going to put together different trainings. I used to do trainings on search and seizure law, for example, on what you could and couldn't do around search and seizure. And so you put together a structure so that and trainings so that the law enforcement officers, the game wardens, are enforcing these laws that, one, they understand the law, they know what the laws are, and two, that they understand the direction of the agency on how they should be enforcing those laws as well, right? So that there's some consistency of application, but also remembering that crazy circumstances happen all the time, and there needs to be some flexibility built into it for a warden to address certain situations on the ground.
So, thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
And so, there's kind of an agency direction, and they try and make sure that those wardens are kind of on the same page as each other across areas, but they aren't always. Now, when a warden sees what may or may not be an infraction, how does he decide if he's going to write a ticket?
Well, can I give a story for this?
Sure.
An example?
But I'm going to remind you to look at your watch first.
Time? Yeah. I think I can do it. Let me give I think trespass is a great example.
Done. That's not. Go ahead.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Of where there's some discretion in how a warden might choose to enforce things a little differently. So we're public land hunters. We hunt private land on occasion too, but we hunt public land. Here's the scenario. And I'll lay out the scenario and say, okay, Nephi, you're the game warden. How would you respond in this scenario? Okay. All right. Yeah. So you're the game warden. Here's the fact pattern. All right. You have a hunter with an antelope tag. This is based on a true story. You have actually, this is exactly a recollection of a true story.
I knew a guy once.
I actually pulled a prank.
Go ahead.
I pulled a prank on this guy, actually, which I will someday tell you the prank that I pulled as a result of this story. Okay. So you have a guy, antelope tag, hunting public land, sees an antelope, reasonable range, comfortable shot, conditions are good, shoots the antelope, pronghorn, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it an antelope. Shoots the antelope. That antelope, like animals often do, especially an animal that can run 60 miles an hour for stretches, is shot, mortally, but doesn't know it's dead yet. And so it takes off running, hops a fence, runs about 20 yards, and dies. Just flops over dead. Double lung shot. That can happen, right? Well, it jumped the fence or went under the fence or whatever, but it crossed onto private land. You're out in the middle of the desert. The nearest ranch house could be 20 miles away. You don't know whether that ranch house actually is this property. You don't know where the owner of this property resides and how to make note of it, to go find it. It's also mid-September and 75 degrees out. And you're worried that if you go on a wild goose chase trying to find this landowner to get permission to go cross the fence to bring this animal back across, you may actually waste the animal. The meat may spoil. So you make the decision to cross the fence, drag the animal back over to the public land, and get it, broken down and on ice. That's what happened. The follow-up of what happened is somebody else, another hunter, saw the second half of the story, the crossing the fence and dragging
on
it
private
in.
land, dragging it.
Didn't see the shot.
Yep.
Called the game warden. Okay.
So the game warden
calls you. You're the game warden. So now what do you do?
Well, I can tell you exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and verify the facts and try and I'm going to find out. I will find out if you're telling the truth. And so that's the number one part. And I know these game wardens, they are going to find out. If you're lying, they're going to find out. So don't lie.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
So,
best investigators I know are game wardens.
Yeah, but I'm going to get out there, I'm going to figure out that you're telling the truth, where you shot from. I'm going to verify it, look at all the stuff, and then I'm going to say, you know what? Assuming we don't have a prior relationship where you've done a bunch of shenanigans and but you're just a legitimate good dude, I'm not going to write a ticket.
Yeah.
Because now I don't have to write you a ticket for spoilage or worry about that dead animal.
What's the worst? So let me ask you this.
Waste.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question. If you're the warden and say that person does go to all the trouble and spends hours trying to track down the landowner and gets permission and then goes to recover the animal and it's spoiled. As the warden, do you write a ticket now for wanton waste? Yeah. I don't know. Maybe not.
No, you don't.
You probably don't because the person did the by-the-book thing of trying to get respecting private property rights.
These guys are they're not just looking at the letter of the law. They're looking at the spirit of the law.
Right.
And they are going to make a call based on the spirit of the law as well. And it's really rare if you're trying to do the right thing. These guys aren't going to come out there. And that's what I wanted you to understand from this previous discussion. Wardens aren't out there to get you. They're not out there to be like, oh, let me see if I can find something wrong because my goal is to, write as many tickets as possible. No, they're out there trying to do the right thing
to protect the wildlife resource
based on what they feel like the will of the people, the will of the rules they've been given. They're going to do what they can to do the right thing in their realm of responsibility. Also understand that that's not the end of it. There are 3 more chances for people to look at you trying to do the right thing, because that warden may give you a ticket, right? But then what happens?
Yeah.
Because the warden gave you a ticket, where does it go?
Yeah. So now let's just say, because the other scenario is a landowner saw this happen and wants the ticket written, and the warden says, okay, I have 2 choices. I can not write any ticket and make the landowner mad, or I can write you the trespass ticket, but I'm not going to confiscate that antelope, right? Yep. And so then what's the next step in the process?
It's now going to go to the county prosecutor.
Right. So that's right. And so I wanted to stick with this fact pattern, but I almost want to now make it a worse fact pattern. So let's make the worst fact pattern is, instead of what I just said, it's you've allegedly poached an antelope, right? And you've got a ticket for that, and you want to contest that, or let's call it wanton waste, because the penalties for wanton waste are higher. So you want to contest it, this wanton waste ticket that you got. The game warden's going to work with the county prosecutor, right, or the district attorney, or whomever it is that has the jurisdiction in the area where this happened to prosecute the case. So the warden's going to do this complete investigation, put together the investigative file, gather all of the evidence, turn that over to the attorney that will make a decision based on that evidence and other factors.
And those other factors are going to be things like how much time he has. Does he he's going to look at you and say, is this guy is this guy a repeat offender? Is this? And by the way, I've got to prosecute violent crimes and domestic abuse and felony assaults and stuff like that too. Do I have time if you're bringing me a case that this guy has too many fish in his freezer at home, and am I spending
this overkill?
Am I spending my time on you, or am I spending your time on this guy who beats his girlfriend? Right. So that's what those prosecutors have to decide. That's why they're not coming to your house to check DNA on sausage.
Right. Right. And so so they can You could have a prosecutor that declines to prosecute. You could have a situation that's just a standard ticket, like a speeding ticket type of situation in the wildlife world, where it's just a fine. And then if you contest the fine, then the warden has to come in and defend, but the prosecutor's office might really not be involved. So we're using a more, wanton waste, a more egregious crime that would actually probably lead to the prosecutor deciding. Yeah. So, okay, they make one of two decisions. I'm not going to move forward with it for various reasons, or I am. So let's make the presumption I'm going to move forward with the case, right? So the prosecutor prosecutes the case, and now you're to that next step that you're talking about.
So now we have one more step, which is you're going to court.
Right.
And in front of court, you're now going to have to make, now that prosecutor has to make the case beyond a reasonable doubt, and he has to make that case to either a judge or a jury of your peers that you now, now realize, like, we are 3 steps up. And now think about how much time that takes. Everybody's time involved and the money involved and the work involved to now get to this step where now you're going to be sitting in a courtroom and the warden's going to have to be he's the prosecutor's presenting facts. The warden is going to have to be explaining how he came to the evidentiary portion of this. And there's another attorney involved because now you've got the defense attorney who's going to be arguing on the other side why this is or isn't applicable, and it's going to be making arguments about the law and saying, where the prosecutor's saying, well, the law reads this way. The law reads A, B, and C, and so therefore D. And then the defense attorney is going to be saying, well, you're misrepresenting what A, B, and C really mean. That's not what they meant. And so you're going to have this argument going on, which is why attorneys make good money. It's because they're going to be making these arguments now to either on behalf of the people or on behalf of the defendant who is innocent, right?
Until proven otherwise, guilty.
Yeah, and that's going to be the next step up.
And then there's one more step beyond that,
which is exactly where we turn the circle.
Yeah, so we keep using different examples, and I don't care. So now I'm off of wanton waste.
Okay.
Now I'm off of wanton waste. Well, we can stay on wanton waste too, but I'm going to go back to the possession. I'm going to go back to possession.
But just let me say, here's how we're going to get here. The law is not, as much as we'd like, this is something that people have to get through their head, whether it's the warden or the person who's responsible or the attorney. The law is not fixed.
No, and
it changes.
And in fact, the law and how it's applied can absolutely affect the policy, right? So the law and how it's applied can absolutely affect the policy. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, let's take the possession limit, the possession limit example, right? If you got a warden that's constantly writing possession limit overages and wanting to push that through the court system, and now it's clogging the system with these types of cases, everybody's contesting it and wanting court, right? What's going to happen? Well, legislator's going to get word of it, and it might change the law, right? So how the law is applied by game wardens and then by the district attorneys and then by the judges can actually wind up enforcing policy. Same thing with wanton waste. On the flip side, if you see a lot of poaching or wanton waste type cases coming through, then and you just keep seeing lots and lots of them, you realize maybe the current system we have isn't a true deterrent, and we need to actually stiffen the penalties. And encourage stricter enforcement, and the legislature might get involved and pass even more restrictive laws. We got some heavy breathing going on from a guy just wandered in off the street. Scott, how you doing?
I'm a little out of shape.
So he really likes natural resource policy. So Scott Steyert just joined us. I'll explain that in a second, but. So we were just talking through, when you get a ticket, what's really happens? Is it, does the warden make all the decisions, or how does policy get turned into law or regulation that then the warden has to interpret, then you get the prosecutor and the judge. And at the end, kind of what I was explaining is that policymakers are going to look at how this entire circle is working. And if it's not working, they're going to change the law. They're going to go through the legislative process or the regulatory process, and they're going to fix it. And so that's how you. And
we see it happen all the time.
Yes, and that's how you, as a person who, goes and hunts, you need to remember that it's these things aren't fixed. And if there's a problem with the law and it's not working correctly, don't just be mad that there's a problem with the law. understand that you can talk to your legislator or you can talk to the commission and you can get these things fixed. You can be part of that process because ultimately it's not the warden that decides those things. It's you. It's you by talking, and because the governor is there to represent you. That Game and Fish Commission is there to work for you. The legislature is there to work for you. And so don't get frustrated by wildlife laws. If you don't like the way that the law is, change it.
I'm going to do that. You got me fired up. I don't like the fact that I haven't drawn a moose tag in like 7 years.
I don't
Me
either.
too.
Right? I don't like the fact that my mountain goat hunt got canceled last year because the National Park Service said the weather was too bad and made a decision for me about my ability to be in the backcountry safely. I don't like that either.
The worst. I agree.
You got me fired up now.
So
I'm gonna
Scott
go change a bunch of laws.
Scott Steyert joined
I'm
us.
with you, man.
And the worst part about having Scott join us is that Scott doesn't think that my dog has to be obedient. So here's this freaking golden retriever who's been laying on the carpet, totally good this entire time. Scott comes in and Scott, like, literally we go hunting. We bring Scott on a hunt. And the first thing he wants to do is get my dog to jump up on him. And so now Murphy is out of freaking control.
You know, I'm kind of like the grandparents who, you know, spoil the kids when they come over.
Yes.
A little bit. But I do have dogs, so I understand the importance of that. So
Sure you do.
I'm trying to, you know, walk that fine line. I want him to
sure
love
you
me more than he loves you. Let's just be honest. That's what
He does.
I know.
It really makes me angry.
I'm watching it right now.
Yeah.
Play out in real
He's
time.
an awesome dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're just about to the end of our discussion. Anything else you want to add, Dave? Before I ask Scott some questions?
No. So the only thing I'd say is, so once you listen to the MeatEater podcast, if you really want to clear things up and make sure that they're on the up and up, come listen to us and we'll tell you if they were right or not.
Right on.
That's what we're going to do from now on. We're going to do nothing but critique.
We're just like a
podcast.
fact-checking podcast now.
Hey,
For
this
me
is
to-
where the rubber meets the road right here.
right.
Okay?
That's right. So, Scott, I have a question for you. How many times have you fallen out of a helicopter?
Have I fallen out of a helicopter? You mean like with a parachute on or?
Just in general.
Once.
Only once? How far did you fall?
Well, I didn't really. It was already landed, and it was there was about a 45-minute infill, and I was the new guy, so they packed me down with all the tools, the holy tools, you know, the shotgun, the breech, all that, right? And I was crammed in the middle. So as we approach, we're getting our 1 minute call and our 30 second, all that, and then we land. Everybody takes off. Well, my leg had fallen asleep, and I think this was probably my first or second mission with my new unit. Okay, and I was trying to make a really good impression.
And you say your new, you can't say the name of the unit, right? You guys are
The
super
unit.
The super secret unit.
And I go to get out. Everybody's just, because it was one of those where you land on the X, you're really close to the target. So we land, and it's just imperative to get out of there fast so the choppers can take off, and everything's happening really fast. And I just fall out, and I'm like, oh my God, man! Like, and then I just feel people like running over me, and I'm trying to get up, and I'm like, I look like this, this gimp that I'm trying to get. So finally, I get up. I finally just through
It's the
through
family
pure
appropriate podcast.
adrenaline.
I just want to throw that out just in case.
Okay. So I get up, and I'm like running, and there was 2 target buildings, and I was in the middle. I'm like, okay, I can't remember. Am I supposed to go left or right? So I ended up picking one. I run in there behind everybody now, the new guy, and I show up, and I clear. I do everything I'm supposed to do, and then I was in the wrong building. So the team leader looks at me, and he goes, "What the blank are you doing here?" And I was like, "Well, it's kind of a long story. I'll tell you later."
These are the guys protecting our country. We feel better.
Oh, there's more. There's more. I mean, just Murphy. It happens. So
Good stuff.
No, well, someday we're going to have you on the podcast, Scott. We're just going to for something that's there's some policy area we'll actually be able to visit with you about. Mm-hmm. It'll be different than just which helicopters you fell out of, or
Well,
what kind of grenade you should have thrown versus what kind of.
At some point, we can share stories about our daughters getting their first deer and everything.
Oh yes,
Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that was an awesome.
That would be a very good podcast.
I think it would too. We should have our daughters join us.
Oh my gosh,
and
that'd
have
be great.
them talk about
Done.
their first
Let's do it.
experience.
We're
Let's
gonna
do
do
it.
because you were on the hunt. We recently went on a hunt.
Yeah.
And we didn't do podcasts from the hunt.
No, we didn't.
No,
that
we
was
should
an
have.
amazing hunt.
It was
that
awesome.
was, I mean, for me, honestly, I could only think of maybe one other hunt that would even come close. Just seeing my daughter.
I don't have any hunt
amazing.
that compare. I've done a lot of awesome hunts, but seeing my daughter get her first
Amazing.
big game animal,
Trumps
it's
it, yeah.
it's an irreplaceable experience. Like
It
it
is.
trumps everything I've ever done in the hunting world.
So
It's
we
so
had-
so it would be an awesome podcast to have our daughters
We'll do
talk about that
Perfect.
experience together.
We'll do
Yeah,
it.
and then I had it on
'Cause
video.
they're the same age,
most of
too,
them-
I
I think so.
think.
13.
Yeah, mine's 12. So
Okay,
they're-
close enough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Your
very
daughter's like
similar.
7 feet tall.
Your daughter, yeah. Mine looks 12. Your
Yeah,
daughter is tall.
You need
She's
to
a
work
big one.
on that basketball because that's a lot of money. That's your retirement right there.
Volleyball's her
No,
thing.
we had that conversation because remember
I
my
know.
daughter is tiny and she plays basketball like crazy, and yours wasn't playing ball.
Yeah, she unfortunately takes after her daddy when it comes to the coordination piece. But she's fast.
Falls
she's
out of
strong.
helicopters.
And but volleyball is her thing. She
And
loves
she's
it, and she's just
she's a deer killer.
really, and a deer slayer.
Yeah.
She also she takes after her daddy.
There you go. So that's
No.
got to be. I have to wrap this up.
I know.
But that's got to be a future podcast.
Agreed.
But I know we're gonna do this. So while you here, so you came to change the tires on my car.
I did.
Yeah, because
I did.
Scott no longer jumps out of helicopters. Now, what the heck were you doing? You
Small
have like
business
a,
owner.
I've traded in my guns and all that for a torque wrench and an impact wrench. I bought into a franchise. It's called Tread Connections, and it's a mobile tire service. So it's a full service. So I can, if somebody calls me and says, "Hey, I need new tires on my vehicle," I can either get the size tire from them if they have it, or they can give me the type of vehicle, the year, and everything. I can order the tires.
I want
They'll
everybody to
come
know
in.
that there was no discount. That Scott did not give me a discount for doing this, but I
I
thought
offered
it was super cool.
a little. I offered you.
Instead, I bought
discount.
you a sandwich.
Instead, you said no and bought me a sandwich, which is cool.
It's like I don't want
it's
your
win-win.
discount. I'm gonna
it's a
give you
Dave's in.
more.
Yeah. So, but I mean, yeah, we do everything. Mount balance. The van comes there to your house.
So tell them where to find it online. Tire Connection.
Treadconnection.com.
Tread Connection. Yep.
And I'm Tread Connection Fort Collins. So,
Yep.
but I work primarily in Fort Collins, but I come into
So during
Cheyenne,
the pandemic,
Maryland.
I think this is actually super cool. It's like you don't need to go, or your wife, or if you're at work, you don't need to figure out how you're going to drop your car off. You go to where the car's at.
Absolutely, whether it's
whatever
at your work, in a parking lot,
any
at your
kind of
house.
tire they want. It's like
Anything.
a mobile tire shop.
Post-pandemic too. I mean, it's
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
it's
it's
hard to
awesome.
find time to do some of that
Yeah.
stuff that you
And so while you're-
need to do. Like
Absolutely.
that's maintenance that you need to have done.
Well,
Like,
while somebody's at their office, you just roll in. They
roll
come
in
back
and do it.
out and they've got new tires on their
that's
car.
another. I mean,
Yep.
it's amazing that it's been taking this long for something like that to roll
Well,
around because we've been doing it with windshields forever.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, that right there is a perfect example. Safe. I don't think I've ever went anywhere and had my windshield replaced. They come to my house. And
Exactly.
I think this is the future of tires. I really do.
Okay, well, we will talk about that maybe more when we do the episode with daughters about shooting your first deer, and me shooting more deer than you did.
And Mike's daughter was on that hunt too, so we should have her too. All three daughters.
That would be way cool. Yep.
Yep, and then we
Let's
can tell
do it.
people everything that I've taught you.
Well, actually, you have taught me a lot about hunting.
That's what I like.
About
That's what I like to hear.
a lot of what not to do.
I know.
mean, it's just
I've
as
learned a
important.
lot of what not to do too from you. Yeah.
Last note, like Scott and I met because we were teammates on the Sniper Adventure Challenge. We met before that. I know, Dave. I will tell the story about how I had to carry you like 50 miles.
Oh yeah, I mean, you are just amazing. I don't know if I could.
And he's
ever
not
done it.
small. He's a big
But
guy.
I will say this.
And then you know what he did
I
do?
was impressed.
I'm going to let everybody know right now that he stole my trekking poles. So for all you guys who used to work with Scott in the unit,
Did I do that?
Yeah, you
Are
did.
you sure I did that?
I'm positive.
Okay,
You're
yeah.
like, oh, my feet hurt.
Yeah, I've got a lot
trekking
of
poles
mileage
that
on
I've
my
been-
old bones.
I've been making fun of your trekking
I
poles for
told you
40
never
miles.
to say anything about that. That's it.
Sounds like
I'm never going to tell you a secret again.
yeah.
All right.
That's fighting words. You break a secret. That's like a code.
It's going to be a good
All right.
episode.
Whew, can't wait. All right, I can't wait for that episode.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm excited. It's going to
All
be good.
right. Hey, well, so everybody, thanks for listening today. If you got questions, you know where to hit us up. It's at the usual places or Your Mountain at itsyourmountain.com, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at the handle at itsyourmountain, and shoot us ideas, shoot us comments, whatever, all good stuff. We don't like the negative stuff, but all the good stuff. And until next time, remember, life is about experiences, so go have one.